Greetings, true champions of the cause. Welcome to Starplanet Beyond the Canon, a showcase of literary fan works from across the multiverse of your favorite intellectual properties. On today's episode, we will be showcasing a work that is very close to my heart. Today, we will be diving into Transformers, Orion, More Than Meets the Eye, a story based on an animated television series that originally aired from September 17th, 1984 to November 11th, 1987, in syndication based upon Hasbro and Takara's Transformers toy line. The series was produced by Marvel Productions and Sunbow Productions in association with Japanese studio Toei Animation for first-run syndication. Now, dear travelers, let's begin. In the dawn of time, two celestial deities, Primus and Unicron, loomed over the cosmos. Primus embodied the essence of creation and vitality, whereas his malevolent counterpart, Unicron, personified chaos, malevolence, and obliteration. These eternal foes took on the colossal forms of celestial metallic bodies, locked in an unending cosmic struggle. Primus transformed into the nurturing world of Cybertron, a bastion of life and prosperity. In contrast, Unicron evolved into a monstrous planet, hungering to consume and devastate entire universes. Drawing upon his life essence, Primus gave birth to diminutive Cybertronian beings, the Transformers, by fracturing his essence into sparks. He then assembled 13 valiant warriors to combat Unicron, christening them the Primes, who would later become known as the 13 original Primes. In a climactic confrontation, Megatron Prime, one of the most formidable among the Primes, turned traitor, slaying his beloved Solus Prime and pledging allegiance to Unicron, forever becoming known as the Fallen. Ultimately, Unicron and his newfound disciple met defeat, as Primus entrapped his brother within his planetary form, banishing him into the abyss of deep space. The remaining Primes exiled the Fallen to another dimension, condemning him to eternal imprisonment. Following the disappearance of the Primes, more Transformers emerged, populating the entire expanse of Cybertron. As Primus entered a deep slumber, he utilized an artifact known as the Matrix of Leadership to transmit power through generations of Primes, ensuring the continuation of their legacy. Morning dawned on Cybertron, casting a soft metallic sheen over the towering spires and gleaming structures of Iacon, the heart of Cybertronian civilization. Within the colossal city, nestled deep within the mighty frame of Metroplex, a young data clerk lay fast asleep in his study, surrounded by scattered data pads and holoscreens displaying ancient texts. His name was Orion Pax, a curious and unassuming mech with a penchant for delving into the annals of Cybertron's storied past. The door to the study slid open with a soft hiss, and a tall, imposing figure stepped inside. His armor was a deep blue, trimmed with the gleaming silver of a seasoned warrior. This was Ultra Magnus, commander of the Cybertron Elite Guard, and a guardian and foster father to the young clerk. He paused, a fond smile tugging at the corners of his mouth as he observed Orion, slumped over his desk, lost in the throes of an unfinished dream. Orion, wake up. Ultra Magnus's voice was deep and resonant, carrying the weight of command, yet tempered with the warmth of familial care. Orion stirred, blinking groggily as he lifted his head. Huh? Ultra Magnus? I'm sorry to disturb you, Ultra Magnus said, stepping closer. I see that you fell asleep in your study again. Orion rubbed the sleep from his optics, glancing down at the scattered data pads. I did? Ultra Magnus nodded, a hint of amusement in his optics. Yes. Oh, Orion murmured, sitting up straighter. I must have fallen asleep after reading a long story about Cybertron's past. A chuckle rumbled from Ultra Magnus's chest. Orion Pax, always fascinated by our ancient history. Orion rose from his seat, the weariness of sleep slowly giving way to the familiar spark of curiosity that burned within him. He turned to his foster father, a question already forming on his lips. Ultra Magnus, what can you tell me about the 13 original primes? Ultra Magnus met Orion's gaze, his expression softening. Always curious, just like your mother, he said, a touch of wistfulness in his voice. Orion's face fell slightly, the mention of his parents a bittersweet reminder of the family he never truly knew. I never knew my mother and father, he said quietly. They died when I was just a sparkling, when the Quintessons attacked Cybertron. Ultra Magnus placed a reassuring hand on Orion's shoulder, his grip firm and comforting. Your parents, Aquila Theta and Solar Guard, may be offline, but their sparks are one with the Allspark. They would be proud of the mech you've become, Orion. You are special in more ways than you know. Later that day, as the sun climbed higher in the Cybertronian sky, Orion Pax made his way to the Iacon Hall of Records. The Grand Hall was a vast repository of knowledge, its towering shelves filled with the history of Cybertron, meticulously cataloged and preserved. Here, Orion found solace in his work as a data clerk, sifting through the ages in search of forgotten truths and ancient wisdom. As he rounded a corner, his focus on the data pads in his arms, Orion collided with another figure, sending the pads clattering to the ground. He looked up to see his adopted older brother, Sentinel Minor, a tall and sturdy mech with a confident stance and a determined glint in his optics. Orion, Sentinel exclaimed, quickly kneeling to help gather the fallen data pads. You should watch where you're going, little brother. Orion laughed sheepishly, accepting the stack of data pads Sentinel handed him. Sorry, Sentinel. I guess I got a bit distracted. Sentinel smiled, his tone light. No harm done. I'm just glad I could catch you before you buried yourself under all this data. The two brothers straightened, Sentinel eyeing Orion with a mixture of pride and affection. I'm off to train at the Autobot Academy, he said, his voice brimming with enthusiasm. One day, I'll be part of the Cybertron Elite Guard. Orion's optics brightened at the mention of the Academy. I wish I could train to be an Autobot warrior too, he admitted, a note of longing in his voice. But I don't have a TCOG. Sentinel placed a reassuring hand on Orion's shoulder, his expression earnest. Don't worry, Orion. You'll get your ability to transform someday. I know it. Orion smiled, grateful for his brother's unwavering belief in him. Thanks, Sentinel. I hope you're right. As the two mechs parted ways, Orion watched his brother walk away, the determination in Sentinel's stride a testament to his future as a warrior. Orion knew his path was different, shaped by his insatiable curiosity and his desire to understand the mysteries of the past. Yet, deep within him, a spark of hope flickered, a hope that one day he too would find his place among the heroes of Cybertron. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the towering spires of Iacon, the Hall of Records grew quiet. The once bustling corridors now echoed with the soft hum of machinery and the faint rustle of data pads being carefully filed away. Orion Pax stood in one of the vast archives, his arms laden with the final stack of records to be sorted for the day. He moved with a practiced ease, his mind still swimming with the ancient histories he had spent the day uncovering. With the last data pad securely in place, Orion sighed in satisfaction, feeling the familiar weight of a day well spent. As he turned to leave, the soft clinking of metal footsteps echoed through the corridor behind him. He paused, glancing over his shoulder, and his spark skipped a beat when he saw her. Ariel. She was a vision in soft pink and silver, her armor sleek and graceful, reflecting the soft light of the archive. Her optics, a bright and lively blue, met his with a warmth that made his circuits hum. Orion's spark pulsed faster as he took in the sight of her. They had known each other since they were young sparklings, but every time he saw her, it was like seeing her for the first time. Orion Pax. Ariel greeted him with a smile that made his circuits tingle. It's been a while. Ariel, Orion managed to say, his voice just a touch higher than usual. He cleared his vocalizer, trying to sound more composed. How are you? I'm doing fine, she replied, her voice carrying a soft melody that seemed to resonate with his spark. What about you? I haven't seen you in ages. Where's your older brother, Sentinel Minor? Sentinel? Orion repeated, momentarily distracted by the way her optics sparkled in the low light. Oh, he's off training at the Autobot Academy. He's determined to join the Cybertron Elite Guard. Ariel nodded thoughtfully. That sounds just like him. He's always been so driven. She then looked at Orion, her optics sweeping over his frame with a playful glint. You've gotten taller since the last time we met. Orion's systems momentarily faltered at the compliment, and he felt heat rise in his faceplates. He stumbled over his words, desperately searching for something clever to say. Well, I guess it's just me trying to reach new heights, you know. Literally, he said with an awkward chuckle, instantly cringing at his own response. Ariel giggled, a sound that made his spark feel lighter. That's a good one, Orion, she said, her voice full of warmth. It's good to see you again. Before he could think of something else to say, something that might convey even a fraction of what he felt, Ariel gave him a soft smile and a wave. I have to go now, but it was really nice catching up. Take care, Orion. Orion managed a nod, his optics half closed as he watched her turn and walk away, her silhouette growing smaller with each step. His spark ached with unspoken words, and as the corridor fell silent once more, he let out a quiet sigh. He was in love with her. He had been for as long as he could remember, but he couldn't bring himself to tell her. Not yet. He lingered there for a moment longer, his mind filled with thoughts of Ariel, before finally turning to leave the Hall of Records. The walk back to Metroplex was a quiet one, the streets of Icon bathed in the soft glow of the setting sun. When he arrived home, the massive city bot welcomed him with the familiar hum of its systems, a sound that always made him feel safe. Once inside, Orion made his way to his study, settling in at his desk. The glow of the holoscreens illuminated his face as he began to research a topic that had been occupying his thoughts lately: TCOGs. These mysterious devices, integral to every transformer, granted the ability to change form at will. It was a power that Orion had always longed for, a connection to the greater world of transformers that he felt was just out of reach. As he read through the data, studying the complex mechanics and the almost mystical nature of TCOGs, a heavy sadness settled over him. He didn't have a TCOG. He couldn't transform. The thought weighed on him, the sense of being different, of being incomplete, pressing down like a physical burden. Orion leaned back in his chair, staring up at the ceiling. His mind drifted back to Ariel, to the way she had smiled at him, the way her presence had lifted his spirits, even if just for a moment. A small smile tugged at the corners of his mouth, but it was tinged with melancholy. He wished he could be more than just a data clerk, more than just a mech confined to one form. He wanted to be someone worthy of Ariel's attention, someone who could stand beside his brother and be proud of who he was. But for now, all he could do was dream and hope that one day things might change. With a deep sigh, Orion turned off the holoscreens, the room falling into darkness. He closed his optics, his thoughts still swirling with ancient histories, future hopes, and a love that he could only express in silence. And with that, let's take a break. We will be back after these messages. You are watching Starplanet, Beyond the Canon.
In a world beyond the stars, where ancient forests whisper secrets of forgotten power and shadowed mountains guard the edges of time, there lies Amzot, a realm of untamed wonder, bound by honor and blood, the Herculoids. The Herculoids.
Would you look at that?
The new Beef Superior is here, only at Starries. Wherever you are in the universe, there's always one place that feels like home. Starries, eat in, eat out, but always eat the best.
In the boundless reaches of space, darkness reigns. Pirates and aliens rule unchecked, ransacking colonies and preying on the innocent. The Galactic Federation's power crumbles, leaving entire star systems at the mercy of ruthless outlaws. But amidst this chaos, one vigilante rises to defend the helpless and bring justice to the lawless. They call him Space Ghost.
The universe is a grand place, full of uncertainty. But the one thing you can be sure on is the greatest pizzas can always be found at Pistol Star Pizza, with over 500 trillion outlets throughout the universe. One thing is for sure, you'll never go hungry at Pistol Star Pizza. Pistol Star Pizza. At Pistol Star Pizza.
Welcome back. Let's continue. Orion Pax lay in his berth, recharging peacefully as the quiet hum of Metroplex's systems provided a soothing backdrop to his slumber. In the darkness of his room, his mind drifted into the depths of a dream, one that took him back to a time long before the responsibilities of adulthood weighed on his shoulders. The dream began softly, with memories of warmth and love. Orion saw himself as an infant sparkling, cradled in the arms of his mother, Aquila Theta. Her gentle voice, full of affection, murmured soft lullabies as she rocked him to sleep. His father, Solar Guard, stood nearby, his presence a steady and protective force. They were a family, whole and happy, their love for each other, and for their son shining as brightly as the stars above Cybertron. But then the dream darkened. the warmth replaced by cold fear. Orion's small frame was bundled tightly in a soft blanket, his mother's arms trembling as she held him close. The sounds of battle echoed in the distance, growing louder with every passing moment. His father's voice, usually calm and reassuring, was tense with urgency. "Aquila," Solar Guard said, his optics dark with worry. "We have to go now. The Quintessons are here." Aquila Theta nodded, her own fear barely concealed as she looked down at her son. "Be strong, my little one," she whispered, pressing a gentle kiss to Orion's forehead before turning to Ultra Magnus, who stood ready to protect them. "Please, take him. Keep him safe." Ultra Magnus, his usually stern expression softened by the gravity of the moment, took the infant into his arms. "I will guard him with my spark," he promised, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. Orion watched, a silent observer within the dream, as his parents turned to face the approaching danger. He wanted to cry out, to reach for them, but he was just a baby, helpless in the face of the nightmare unfolding around him. The last thing he saw was the determined, loving look in their optics as they charged into the fray, knowing they would not return. The scene shifted, and Orion was older now, no longer an infant, but a small child. He was in Metroplex, where Ultra Magnus had raised him as his own. Orion ran through the wide halls of their home, his little legs carrying him as fast as they could go, his laughter echoing off the walls. He turned a corner and nearly collided with a mech twice his size. It was Sentinel Minor, his newly adopted older brother, who had only recently come to live with them. Sentinel, a little older and taller, caught Orion before he could fall, his stern face breaking into a rare grin. "Careful, Orion," Sentinel chided, though there was no real anger in his voice. "You're going to knock something over." Orion looked up at him with wide, innocent optics. "Sorry, Sentinel." "I was just excited." Before Sentinel could respond, they were interrupted by the sound of visitors arriving. Orion and Sentinel both turned to see Autobot veteran Nebulon and his sparkmate Lumina entering the room, accompanied by a young fembot about their age. "This is Ariel," Lumina said, her voice as warm as the gentle light that seemed to follow her wherever she went. "Say hello, Ariel." The young femme stepped forward shyly, her optics wide as she took in the sight of the two boys. Orion and Sentinel stared back, both of them captivated. They had never seen a girl their age before, and Ariel's presence was like a soft breeze through the corridors of their home. "Hi," Ariel said softly, her voice like a melody. Orion and Sentinel exchanged a glance, both suddenly eager to impress their new friend. Over the next few cycles, the three of them became inseparable, spending their days exploring Metroplex, playing games, and sharing stories. As they grew, so did the bond between them, though neither Orion nor Sentinel could deny the flutter in their sparks whenever Ariel was near. Time moved quickly in the dream, showing glimpses of their lives as they grew older. Sentinel, always the more ambitious of the two brothers, decided to train at the Autobot Academy, determined to join the Cybertron Elite Guard. Orion, unsure of his own path, worked as a maintenance bot for a time before finding his place as a data clerk at the Iacon Hall of Records. One day, when Orion was older, Ultra Magnus sat him down, his expression serious. "Orion," Ultra Magnus began, his voice gentle but firm, "there's something you need to know. You were adopted. Your real parents, they were Aquila Theta and Solar Guard." Orion's optics widened in surprise. I never knew them. They loved you very much," Ultra Magnus continued, but they sacrificed everything to keep you safe during the Quintesson invasion. They gave you to me, and I promised to protect you. You have their strength in you, Orion. Never forget that." The dream shifted again, and suddenly, Orion was no longer reliving memories, but glimpsing something else, something far more terrifying. The skies of Cybertron were darkened by war, the ground beneath his feet trembling with the force of the devastation. He saw himself standing amidst the chaos, holding up a relic that shone as brightly as a star, its power almost blinding. Then, the vision changed. He saw the Quintessons once more, their cold, emotionless faces etched with cruelty as they advanced upon Cybertron. The ground trembled as a massive figure loomed above, transforming from a giant robot into a spaceship, its presence overwhelming. And then, in the distance, he saw a blue and green planet, unfamiliar, yet somehow significant. Orion's spark raced with fear as the images overwhelmed him, the dream turning into a nightmare that gripped him tightly. He felt himself falling, the weight of the future pressing down on him until he couldn't breathe. And then, just as suddenly, he woke up, his cyan blue optics snapping open as he sat up in his berth. He panted heavily, his frame trembling from the intensity of the dream. His mind raced, the images of the war, the relic, and the distant planet still fresh in his memory. It had felt so real, so vivid, that it took him several moments to calm himself down, to remind himself that it was just a dream. Orion wiped at his optics, feeling the lingering moisture of tears that had escaped during his sleep. With a deep breath, he tried to push the nightmare from his mind, focusing on the familiar surroundings of his room in Metroplex. The next day, Orion decided to take an oil bath to relax, hoping the warmth would help ease the tension from the restless night. As he soaked in the calming oils, he let his mind drift, trying to shake off the unease that clung to him. When he finally emerged, refreshed and ready to face the day, he checked his schedule and was relieved to find that it was his day off. No need to head to the Hall of Records today. Orion smiled, pleased with the unexpected free time, though he wasn't sure how to spend it. Just as he was pondering his options, the door to his quarters slid open, revealing Sentinel Minor. His brother had returned from the Autobot Academy, his armor gleaming from a recent polish, a grin on his face. "Orion," Sentinel called out, his voice full of energy. "I'm back." Orion turned, his face brightening at the sight of his brother. "Sentinel, how was training?" "Grueling as always," Sentinel replied with a chuckle, "but worth it. Listen, Dion and I were thinking, how about we head to Canon today? There's a big gladiator match in the pits. You've never seen one, right?" Orion blinked, surprised by the invitation. "Canon? I've never been to Canon before, let alone seen a gladiator match." "Exactly," Sentinel said, clapping a hand on Orion's shoulder. "It'll be fun. Come on. You need a break from all that dusty old data at the hall." Orion hesitated for a moment, but the idea of experiencing something new, something exciting, was too tempting to pass up. "All right, I'm in." Sentinel grinned, and the two brothers left Metroplex together, heading towards a day that would take them to the heart of Canon, a place of danger and thrill, far from the safety of Econ. Orion couldn't have known then how much that trip would change his life, how it would set him on a path he never could have imagined. But for now, he was simply eager to see what awaited him in the infamous pits of Canon. The train ride to Canon was a journey that took them far from the gleaming spires and well-maintained streets of Yacon into a region known for its rough edges and stark contrasts. The monorail hummed along the tracks, its rhythmic vibrations a steady background to the conversation that filled the compartment where Sentinel Minor, Orion Pax, and Dion sat together. Sentinel Minor leaned back in his seat, his posture relaxed, but his optics sharp, taking in the passing scenery. "So, Orion," he began, a grin playing on his lips, "you ever heard the stories about Canon? It's nothing like Iacon, that's for sure." Orion, sitting across from his brother, glanced out the window, watching as the cityscape slowly gave way to the harsher, industrial landscape of Canon. "I've read about it, but I've never seen it in person. The records describe it as volatile." Dion, seated next to Sentinel, chuckled. "Volatile is one way to put it, but it's also exciting, full of energy. The pits are legendary, you know. They say you haven't really experienced Cybertron until you've seen a match in Canon." Orion nodded, his curiosity piqued. "I've read about the gladiators. They're warriors, right? Trained for combat in the arena." "That's right," Sentinel replied, his voice carrying a note of admiration. "They're some of the toughest bots you'll ever see. In Canon, strength is everything. The gladiators fight to prove themselves, to show they're the strongest in all of Cybertron." Dion leaned forward, his optics bright with excitement. "You'll see some incredible battles today, Orion. The pits are raw, real. It's not just about fighting. It's about survival, about proving your worth." Orion listened intently, absorbing the enthusiasm of his companions. He had always been more of a thinker, a mech who valued knowledge and understanding. But there was something about the idea of raw, unfiltered combat that intrigued him, something primal and ancient that resonated with the deepest parts of his spark. "Do you think?" Orion began hesitantly. "Do you think I could ever be like them? A warrior, I mean." Sentinel Minor exchanged a glance with Dion before answering. "Orion, you've got the heart for it. I've seen how hard you work, how dedicated you are. But being a gladiator, or a warrior for that matter, isn't just about strength or fighting. It's about knowing who you are, what you're willing to fight for." Dion nodded in agreement. "It's true. In the pits, the strongest bots aren't always the ones who win. It's the ones who know why they're fighting, the ones who have something to prove." Orion considered their words, feeling a mixture of doubt and determination. "But I don't have a T-cog. I can't transform. How could I ever be a warrior without that ability?" Sentinel's expression softened. "Don't let that hold you back, Orion. You might not have a T-cog, but you've got something just as important. Your mind. You're one of the smartest bots I know. Don't underestimate that. Besides, who knows what the future holds? Maybe one day, you'll find a way to overcome that limitation." Orion looked down at his hands, still grappling with the weight of his own insecurities. He had always admired Sentinel for his strength and confidence, qualities that seemed to come so naturally to his older brother. But deep down, Orion knew that his path was different, that his destiny might not lie in the arena or on the battlefield. "Thanks, Sentinel," Orion said quietly, offering a small smile. "I guess I just want to prove that I can be more than what I am now." Dion clapped Orion on the shoulder, his tone reassuring. "You will, Orion. Just give it time. We all have our own paths to walk. Today, though, just enjoy the show. Who knows? Maybe you'll find some inspiration in the pits." As the train continued its journey, the landscape outside grew harsher, the skies darker with the soot and smoke that rose from Canon's massive factories. The city itself was a sprawling industrial labyrinth, a far cry from the gleaming towers of Iacon. Orion felt a mix of apprehension and anticipation as they approached their destination. This was a world unlike any he had known, a place where strength and power ruled, and where the weak were left behind. When the train finally slowed to a stop at the Canon station, Sentinel, Dion, and Orion stood, gathering their belongings. The doors hissed open, and they stepped out onto the platform, greeted by the sights and sounds of the infamous city. "Welcome to Canon," Sentinel said with a grin, gesturing to the city spread out before them. "Ready to see some real action?" Orion took a deep breath, steeling himself for the day ahead. "Yeah," he replied, his voice filled with a newfound resolve. "Let's do this." Together, the three friends made their way into the heart of Canon, where the pits awaited, ready to introduce Orion Pax to a side of Cybertron he had never known. A place where the line between survival and destruction was razor thin, and where he would begin to discover the strength that lay within him. Canon was a stark contrast to the polished brilliance of Iacon. As Orion, Sentinel, and Dion walked through its gritty streets, the air was thick with the smell of energon and industrial smog, and the city hummed with a constant undercurrent of tension. Massive factories belched plumes of smoke into the darkened skies, and everywhere, mechs hustled about, their movements quick and purposeful. This was a city built on survival, where power and dominance reigned supreme. Sentinel walked with a confident stride, his optics scanning their surroundings. Dion, as always, was buzzing with energy, his excitement practically tangible. Orion, however, kept his optics wide, soaking in every detail. He had read about Canon countless times, but nothing could have prepared him for the raw, chaotic energy that flowed through the streets. Here, everything seemed on the verge of violence, and yet there was an undeniable allure to the place. "This way," Sentinel said, his voice low as they approached the arena. "The pits are just ahead." Orion followed closely, his gaze drawn to the towering structure that loomed in the distance. The Canon gladiatorial arena was a behemoth of architecture, its jagged, rusted spires jutting into the sky like the claws of some ancient beast. For the first time in his life, Orion felt a pull toward that world, a desire to be something more than just a data clerk. As the battle raged on, Sentinel leaned over, his voice barely audible above the din. "What do you think, Orion? Quite the show, huh?" Orion nodded, his optics still fixed on the arena. "It's incredible, but it's more than just a show. These gladiators, what they do, it's about survival, about proving who they are." Sentinel smiled, his optics gleaming. "Exactly. And maybe one day, you'll find your own arena, Orion. It might not look like this, but you'll have your chance to prove yourself." Orion didn't respond, but his mind was already racing. The images from his dream, of war, of a relic that glowed with unimaginable power, flashed through his mind. He had no idea what the future held, but for the first time, he felt like he was on the verge of discovering who he truly was. The battle in the arena continued, but Orion's thoughts had already moved beyond the pits. Something was awakening inside him, something powerful and ancient, a spark that had been dormant for too long, and though he couldn't yet fully understand it, he knew that his life was about to change in ways he couldn't even begin to imagine. For now, though, he would watch, learn, and wait for the moment when his own battle would begin. The air in the pits of Canon crackled with anticipation. Orion Pax, Sentinel Minor, and Dion found themselves standing among the roaring crowd, the excitement of the arena palpable in every spark. The stands were filled with Cybertronians from all walks of life, workers, miners, and even the occasional off-duty guard, all gathered to witness the brutality and spectacle of the gladiator matches. Orion felt a mixture of fascination and unease as he scanned the arena below. It was an immense circular pit, its walls scarred with the marks of countless battles. Above, massive floodlights bathed the battlefield in harsh, unforgiving light. This was Canon at its most primal, a place where strength and survival were the only currencies that mattered. Suddenly, a hush fell over the crowd, followed by a low rumble of anticipation. The gates on the far side of the arena groaned open, and a massive figure stepped into view. He was imposing, his silver and red frame gleaming under the lights, and his optics burning with intensity. D16, the champion of Canon, had arrived. Orion felt a surge of energy ripple through the crowd as they erupted into cheers. D16! D16! They chanted in unison, their voices rising like thunder. Sentinel Minor leaned in close to Orion. That's him, the best fighter in Canon. D16's undefeated. The crowd loves him. Dion nodded enthusiastically. He's a legend around here. And not just for his strength. His speeches get everyone fired up. Watch, you'll see. Orion's optics widened as D16 marched to the center of the arena, his every movement exuding power and confidence. The champion raised a fist to the crowd, silencing their chants with a single commanding gesture. Then, he pointed to the opposite gate as it began to open with a deep metallic groan. From the shadows emerged Clench, a massive brute of a gladiator, his green and purple armor scratched from dozens of brutal battles. The crowd's cheers shifted to a more mixed tone. Some booed, others called out Clench's name, but there was no doubt who the favorite was tonight. D16 stood tall, his optics locked on Clench with an intensity that sent a chill down Orion's spark. The arena's announcer, a disembodied voice amplified by the towering walls, boomed over the din. Tonight, in the pits of Canon, D16, the undefeated champion, faces Clench in a battle for supremacy. Let the duel begin. Without another word, D16 charged forward with the speed and grace of a predator. Clench met him head-on, swinging a massive fist toward D16's torso. But the champion was faster. He ducked under Clench's swing, pivoting smoothly to land a devastating uppercut to Clench's jaw, sending the larger gladiator staggering back. The crowd roared as the battle unfolded with brutal efficiency. Clench recovered quickly, unleashing a barrage of heavy blows, but D16 evaded them with expert precision, his footwork swift and fluid. Every move was calculated, every strike precise. It was clear why he was the champion. Orion watched in awe as D16 maneuvered around Clench, using his smaller size to his advantage. The silver and red gladiator was not only powerful, but incredibly skilled, his combat style a perfect blend of raw strength and tactical mastery. Then came the finishing move. As Clench lunged forward in a desperate attempt to land a powerful punch, D16 sidestepped, spinning behind his opponent. With a quick and vicious strike to the back of Clench's head, D16 sent the larger gladiator crashing to the ground with a thundering impact that shook the arena. The crowd erupted into deafening cheers as Clench lay defeated, his massive frame sprawled across the arena floor. The announcer's voice echoed once again. The victor, D16, champion of Canon. D16 stood over Clench, his optics scanning the roaring crowd. For a moment, he seemed larger than life, a symbol of power and dominance. Then, with a nod to the medics who rushed in to retrieve Clench's unconscious form, he raised both fists to the air, accepting the crowd's adoration. Orion couldn't help but be swept up in the excitement. "He's incredible," he murmured, almost to himself. Sentinel chuckled, clapping Orion on the back. "Told you it would be worth the trip. That's what true power looks like." Dion leaned over. "You know, D16's famous for sticking around after the matches to give autographs. Bet he'd give you one if you ask. Orion's optics lit up. Really? Do you think I could meet him? Of course. Sentinel grinned. Though you'll have to get in line. He's the most popular bot in Canon. Later that day, as the excitement of the match began to die down, Orion, Sentinel, and Dion found themselves in the queue with a throng of other fans, all waiting for their chance to meet the champion. The line moved slowly, but Orion could feel the anticipation building in his spark with every step closer to the front. Finally, it was his turn. As Orion stepped forward, his optics locked onto D16, who was seated at a table, signing autographs for the crowd. Up close, the champion seemed even more imposing, his silver and red armor gleaming with battle scars that only enhanced his fearsome presence. Orion hesitated for a moment, feeling a little overwhelmed, but then he mustered his courage and stepped forward. "Hi, I'm Orion Pax," he said, his voice respectful but full of admiration. "It's an honor to meet you. I've heard so much about you." D16 looked up from the autograph he was signing, his optics narrowing slightly as he took in the younger bot before him. But then, a faint smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Nice to meet you, Orion Pax," he said, his deep voice carrying a quiet confidence. "Always good to meet a fan." Orion handed him a datapad, and D16 quickly scribbled his signature before handing it back. "You're incredible," Orion continued, his words tumbling out in a rush. "The way you fought today, it was like you were always one step ahead. And your speeches, they really move people." D16 leaned back slightly, his optics appraising Orion. "You pay close attention," he said with a nod of approval. "The arena's not just about brute strength. You need strategy, skill, and sometimes words to inspire." Orion beamed, grateful for the champion's words. "I think what you're doing is important. You're not just fighting for yourself. You're showing everyone what's possible when you refuse to back down." D16's smile deepened, and for a brief moment, Orion thought he saw something more in the champion's optics, something like ambition, a hunger that went beyond the arena. "You've got a good spark, Orion Pax," D16 said, his tone sincere. "It's rare to meet someone who understands that. I'll be watching to see where you go." Orion's spark swelled with pride. "Thank you, sir. Maybe one day we'll meet again." D16 extended a hand, and Orion shook it, feeling the champion's firm grip. "Maybe we will," D16 said, his voice low and thoughtful. "Until then, keep your optics open, Orion Pax. This world has a lot more to offer than what you see in the arena." With that, Orion stepped back, his spark still buzzing from the encounter. As he rejoined Sentinel and Dion, he couldn't help but glance back at D16, who was already moving on to the next fan, his presence commanding the same respect and admiration from everyone around him. "How'd it go?" Sentinel asked with a grin. Orion smiled, clutching the signed datapad. "I think I just met someone who's going to change Cybertron." Sentinel raised an optic ridge but didn't press further. As the three bots made their way back through the streets of Canon, Orion's thoughts lingered on D16, the champion of the pits. Something about him stirred something deep in Orion's spark, a feeling that their paths were destined to cross again, perhaps in ways neither of them could yet foresee. As they walked through the crowded streets of Canon, the buzz of the gladiator match still lingered in the air. Orion Pax was deep in thought, his mind returning again and again to D16 and the way the champion had spoken to him. Something about that conversation left Orion with a feeling he couldn't shake. D-16 wasn't just another fighter. There was a weight behind his words, a depth to his ambition that seemed to extend beyond the arena. Orion glanced over at his older brother, Sentinel Minor, who was casually scanning their surroundings. Dion was animatedly discussing the match, but Orion's focus was elsewhere. He had been thinking about something D-16 had said, about the world being larger than what he could see in the arena. His curiosity, always simmering just below the surface, finally broke through. "Sentinel," Orion began carefully, "I've been hearing things lately about Decepticons." Sentinel Minor's expression darkened almost immediately. His posture stiffened, and he cast a wary glance toward the surrounding bots, as if to ensure no one was paying them too much attention. "Decepticons? Where did you hear about that?" Orion hesitated. "Around. People talk, especially in places like this. Kaon seems different from Yakon. There's more tension here, more anger. I was wondering if it had anything to do with them." Sentinel sighed and waved for Dion to go on ahead. "Dion, go grab us a drink at that kiosk over there. I need to talk to Orion for a minute." Dion gave a mock salute and wandered off, leaving the two brothers alone. Once Dion was out of earshot, Sentinel fixed Orion with a serious gaze. "You need to be careful, Orion. Talking about the Decepticons openly, especially here in Kaon, isn't a good idea. Not everyone around here is loyal to Zeta Prime, and you never know who's listening." Orion frowned, feeling a chill settle over him. "But who are they, really? I've heard their name before, but no one ever explains much. Why do people seem so afraid to even mention them?" Sentinel glanced around one more time before speaking in a low voice. "The Decepticons aren't just some random group of thugs. They're a faction, a dangerous one, and they trace their origins back to one of the darkest chapters in Cybertron's history." Orion's optics narrowed, his curiosity piqued. "What do you mean?" Sentinel's expression hardened, his voice grim. "They were followers of Megatronus Prime, also known as the Fallen." Orion's spark froze at the mention of the name. He had heard of the Fallen in old stories, one of the original 13 Primes who had betrayed Cybertron in his lust for power. It was said he had tried to turn against his fellow Primes, allying himself with dark forces to seize control of the planet's lifeblood, Energon. His rebellion had nearly torn Cybertron apart before the other Primes intervened. "The Fallen?" Orion repeated, his voice low. "But he was one of the 13, a Prime. How could anyone follow him after what he did?" Sentinel's optics darkened. "Power attracts those who crave it, Orion. Even after the Fallen's defeat, his ideals, his hunger for absolute control, survived in the minds of others. His followers became the Decepticons. They believed in his vision of a Cybertron ruled by the strong, where energon and power were hoarded by a few at the expense of the many." Orion's mind raced, trying to reconcile the idea of such a threat with the peaceful life he had known in Econ. But the Fallen, he was defeated, wasn't he? The Primes imprisoned him in limbo, didn't they? "Yes," Sentinel confirmed, his optics narrowing. "The Fallen's been sealed away, trapped in limbo by the other Primes, but his influence never truly vanished. The Decepticons went into hiding, regrouping, waiting, and now they're still out there, plotting to overthrow Zeta Prime and take control of Cybertron. If they succeed, they'll drain our energon reserves dry and plunge the planet into chaos." Orion felt a sense of unease wash over him. The very thought of a force so bent on domination lurking in the shadows unsettled him. But if the Fallen is gone, who's leading them now? Sentinel's expression darkened even further, his voice lowering to a near whisper. Their leader now is Deathbringer. The name hung heavy in the air between them, its weight almost tangible. Orion shuddered at the sound of it, though he wasn't sure why. Deathbringer? He repeated. I've never heard of him. Who is he? Sentinel's optics flashed with a grim intensity. He's worse than the Fallen in some ways. They say Deathbringer was once a disciple of the Fallen himself, a warrior forged in darkness and destruction. He's more than just a leader to the Decepticons. He's their prophet, their herald. He preaches the same message of strength and domination, but with a darker twist. Orion felt a chill run through his circuits. Darker? How could it get any worse? By that time, Deathbringer had rallied the Decepticons, preaching that they would succeed where the Fallen had failed, by conquering Cybertron, draining it of its energon, and ultimately handing the planet over to Unicron once it was completely spent. Orion shuddered at the thought. The idea that anyone would willingly serve Unicron, the ancient destroyer, was incomprehensible to him. Deathbringer was a powerful warrior, Sentinel continued. He wasn't just a leader, he was a force of nature on the battlefield. He personally led the Decepticon charge against the last remaining primes, slaughtering them without mercy. One by one, he killed them, until only Zeta Prime was left. The two of them clashed in a fight that shook Cybertron itself. Orion listened intently, his optics wide as Sentinel told the story. Zeta fought bravely, but Deathbringer was relentless. It seemed like the Decepticons might actually win, but in the heat of battle, Zeta summoned every last ounce of his strength and slashed Deathbringer across his right optic with his mighty axe, blinding him in that eye. The blow was so powerful that it forced Deathbringer to retreat. His forces scattered, but before they fled, they swore they would return, and that when they did, they would finish what the Fallen started. Orion's spark was racing now. So Deathbringer survived, and the Decepticons are still out there, planning their next move. Yes, Sentinel said, his tone grave. They're in hiding, biding their time. But make no mistake, Orion, they haven't given up. They're still out there, still plotting to overthrow Zeta Prime and take control of Cybertron. When the time is right, they'll strike again. Orion's mind was racing, but there was one thing he couldn't let go of. What about Unicron? You said the Decepticons want to hand Cybertron over to him. Is he really still out there waiting? Sentinel's expression softened, and he put a reassuring hand on Orion's shoulder. You don't need to worry about Unicron, Orion. Our God and Creator, Primus, made sure of that. Unicron has been lost in deep space for eons, unable to find his way back to Cybertron. Primus ensured that his evil twin brother would remain out there, far from our world. The stories about Unicron are terrifying, yes, but he's nothing more than a myth now, something to scare young Cybertronians. Orion felt a small sense of relief, though he still couldn't shake the lingering fear. But the Decepticons, they believe in him, don't they? They want to bring him back. Sentinel nodded grimly. They do. The Decepticons see Unicron as the ultimate destroyer, the force that will reshape Cybertron in their image. They believe that draining the planet of its energon and plunging it into chaos, they'll create the perfect conditions for Unicron's return. But Orion, you have to understand, the Decepticons are a mad cult, terrorists driven by twisted ideals. They're dangerous, yes, but they're also delusional. Their obsession with Unicron won't save them. Orion felt the weight of his brother's words, but there was still something unsettling about it all. So you don't think Unicron could ever return? No, Sentinel said firmly. Primus made sure of that. Unicron may have been a real threat once, but he's been banished for so long that even the Decepticons' belief in him is just a fantasy. What we have to focus on is stopping the Decepticons themselves before they cause any more damage to our world. Orion nodded, though the weight of everything he'd just learned still hung over him. The Decepticons, with their deception, their ruthless tactics, and their dark ambitions, were far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. But he also felt a growing resolve within him. He couldn't sit idly by, not when Cybertron was threatened by such a sinister force. As they walked on, Orion Pax silently vowed to himself that he would be ready to face whatever challenges came, no matter how dark or dangerous. He would do whatever it took to protect Cybertron and its future, even if that meant confronting the Decepticons head-on one day. In the desolate wastelands, once a war zone, and now the hidden refuge of the Decepticons, the air was thick with the scent of rusted metal and decay. Shattered remnants of old Cybertronian battle machines lay scattered across the horizon, half buried in the scorched ground. The silence of the wastelands was only broken by the low hum of distant energy fields and the faint rumbling of Cybertron's internal systems beneath the surface. At the heart of the Decepticon hideout, an old subterranean fortress dug deep into the remains of a long-forgotten battlefield. Deathbringer stood on an elevated platform, his dark silver and red form towering over the gathered Decepticons below. His left optic, a burning red, glowed menacingly, while his scarred, damaged right optic remained dark, a testament to the battle with Zeta Prime that had nearly taken his life. It is through patience and deception that we will win this war, not through blind rage. Megazarak, though still seething with the need for vengeance, nodded slowly. As you command, Father, I will wait. But when the time comes, I will personally see Zeta Prime fall. Deathbringer gave his son a curt nod, satisfied. He then turned back to his Decepticons, his gaze burning with cold, calculated resolve. The Autobots think they are safe. They think they have banished us to the fringes of this world, but they have no idea what's coming. We will strike when they least expect it. We will burn Iacon to the ground, and Cybertron will be ours once again. As the Decepticons let out a chorus of cheers and roars of approval, Deathbringer stood tall and motionless, his optic glowing with the quiet fury of a patient predator. In the shadows of the wastelands, the Decepticons' dark plans began to take shape. The train gently hissed as it slowed to a stop in Iacon, the shining city of Cybertron, where the skyline was dotted with towering spires of silver and blue. The doors opened with a soft pneumatic sound, and Orion Pax, alongside his older adopted brother Sentinel Minor, stood at the entrance, glancing back at their friend Dion. "Guess this is where we part ways," Dion said, flashing a grin, though there was a hint of reluctance in his voice. "Yeah," Orion nodded with a small smile. "Take care, Dion. Let us know if you're ever in Iacon again." "Always, Orion," Dion replied, clapping him on the shoulder. "And Sentinel, try not to let your little brother get into too much trouble, huh?" Sentinel smirked but said nothing, just nodding in farewell. As the doors closed and the train pulled away, Dion waved, his figure shrinking into the distance as he returned to his life in Caon. Orion and Sentinel stood for a moment, taking in the vast cityscape of Iacon. The difference between the gleaming, orderly streets of their home and the chaotic, rough-and-tumble atmosphere of Caon was stark. Here, everything felt safe, peaceful. even if they knew the threat of the Decepticons loomed ever closer. "Come on, Orion," Sentinel said, nudging him. "Let's get home." They walked through the grand halls of Metroplex, their home in Iacon, where gleaming corridors and massive statues of ancient primes greeted them at every corner. Metroplex himself, a massive city-sized Cybertronian, stood vigilant over the heart of the Autobot capital, his internal chambers serving as both a home and a fortress for many. Once back inside their quarters, Orion Pax felt a wave of curiosity wash over him. The Gladiator D-16 was still fresh in his mind, and he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story of the mighty champion. He settled into his seat, pulling up a holographic display and beginning to scan through articles and archives about D-16. The headlines flashed before him. D-16 rises, from Energon Minor to champion of the pits of Kaon. D-16's glory in Kaon's arena, the making of a legend. Former Minor becomes Kaon's hope for strength in dark times. Orion read eagerly, soaking in every detail. D-16 had once been a miner in the deepest shafts of Cybertron, toiling away for Energon before rising through the ranks as a gladiator. The articles described his rise to fame, his raw strength, and his ability to inspire others through his fierce speeches in the arena. It struck Orion that D-16, despite his past, had found a way to become something more. If D-16 could rise from nothing, maybe, just maybe, Orion could learn how to fight too. Even if he didn't have a T-cog to transform, he believed there were other ways to prove himself. Just as his mind wandered with possibilities, Orion heard heavy footsteps down the hall. He knew those steps well. Ultra Magnus, his adopted father, was preparing to leave for an important meeting. Orion rose and walked toward the sound, finding Ultra Magnus, towering and imposing in his massive blue and red armor, adjusting his weaponry. His face, though always stern, had a warmth that made Orion feel secure. Sentinel Minor had already left for patrol duties, leaving only Orion at home with Magnus for the moment. "Father," Orion said, stepping forward hesitantly, "are you heading out for a meeting with Zeta Prime?" Ultra Magnus turned his head and gave a small nod. "Yes, Orion. It's important that the Elite Guard meets with the Prime. There are growing concerns about Decepticon activity in the wastelands." He looked at his adopted son with a hint of concern, but quickly masked it behind his duty-bound expression. Orion hesitated for a moment, then asked, "Have you ever fought a Decepticon before?" The question made Ultra Magnus stop in his tracks. He glanced down at Orion, his optics narrowing slightly, though not out of anger, more out of a desire to shield the young Cybertronian from the darker truths of their world. "Orion," Ultra Magnus began, his voice heavy with authority, "I know you're curious about the past. The war between the Autobots and the Decepticons is a grim part of our history, one filled with betrayal and violence. I've seen more than my share of it." "But have you?" Orion pressed, his optics wide, eager to understand more. "Have you fought one? What were they like?" Ultra Magnus's jaw tightened. He was a warrior, Zeta Prime's second in command and leader of the Cybertron Elite Guard. But he had always tried to protect Orion and Sentinel from the harsher realities of war. Even now he struggled with how much he should reveal. "Orion," he said, his voice softening, "you ask too many questions about things you're not ready for. The Decepticons are dangerous, yes, but you don't need to worry about them right now. Your focus should be on learning about Cybertron, its history, and the role you can play in preserving peace. There are plenty of records in the archives if you wish to learn more about the war." Orion lowered his gaze, feeling a bit chastened but still burning with curiosity. Ultra Magnus placed a large, comforting hand on his shoulder. You have a good spark, Orion, and one day you'll understand the full weight of what it means to fight in a war. But for now, let me worry about the Decepticons. With that, Ultra Magnus straightened, his stern expression returning as he prepared to leave. I must go. Zeta Prime is waiting. Sentinel will be home later, so if you need anything, he'll be around. Be safe, Orion said softly, watching as his adopted father walked out of Metroplex, his towering figure disappearing through the massive gates. Once he was gone, Orion stood in silence, staring at the empty doorway. His thoughts wandered back to D16 and the Decepticons. There was a fire inside him now, one that he couldn't quite put out. He wanted to know more. He needed to understand the conflict that shaped their world, and somehow, in the back of his mind, he felt that his path would inevitably cross with those of D16 and the Decepticons, and deep down, he knew that someday he would have to make a choice. And with that, true champions of the cause. Our story has come to an end. It was a long one, but it was a good one. I may have a bias, but I really enjoyed that story. And I'd urge you to seek out more stories, written by Mel Spy Rose. I thank you for spending this time with us, and I look forward to seeing you again. Please let your thoughts be known in the comments. I truly look forward to reading them. So, until next time, please like, comment, and subscribe. Go visit enterstarplanet.com for more. And until our paths meet again, I have been your host, Arius Valo. See you in the shadows, my love.